flagship courses. The trial has already started. Give a call and join now. Now, when we discuss about the biodiversity, the concern is on the biodiversity loss, because the biodiversity and the ecosystem, they are all interconnected to each other. Okay, so we have to make a global commitment to halt the biodiversity loss. And because the world is facing, and it was also facing in the 1970s, in the 1980s, an unprecedented loss of biodiversity. And this loss of biodiversity, it was threatening the existence of the ecosystems, as well as it was threatening, if the ecosystem is threatened, it threatens the economies as well as the well-being of the entire population. So if we have to focus on the key statistics, so 75% of the world's food crops that we depend on, they at least they involve a part of animal pollination. Animals are required. The biodiversity is required for the pollination to take place. And a number of pollinator species worldwide are being driven towards the extinction, and because of the biodiversity loss. So, taking these things into consideration, in the year 1992, in the city of Rio de Janeiro, the world came together for a world summit and on that world summit, or on that earth summit, okay, came three different UN conventions. And one of the UN convention was the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. So UN Convention on Biological Diversity, or UNCBD. The other two convention being the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, as well as United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. So these three were the outcomes. These three UN conventions were the outcomes of the 1992 Rio Summit. And this UNCBD is a legally binding treaty, and it also provides a very comprehensive framework for action to protect the biodiversity. And how it achieves this, or the convention achieves its objectives through various protocols and a very recent Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, or that we call as GBF, or the Global Biodiversity Framework. So CBD is implemented through the specialized protocols and a clear, ambitious action plan. And what is the action plan? The action plan is the Global Biodiversity Framework, or the GBF. And in the year 2024, we had the latest conference of parties that was held in the city of Cali in Colombia. Okay. Now let's discuss about the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity in a bit more detail. So this convention, it's the world's legal instrument for nature for the Convention of Biological Diversity. This was opened for signature at the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, and it came into force the following year, that is in the year of 1993. If we have to talk about the legality or the legal status, it is a legally binding multilateral treaty. Okay, so please note that the convention itself is legally binding, unlike the UNFCCC, which itself was not legally binding, but its protocols were. And if we have to talk about the membership, there are 196 parties that have ratified the convention. And if we have to take an exception, okay, so United States of America is one such country, or is one such party that has signed the convention but has not ratified it. That means the Congress or the Parliament of the United States has not passed or has not approved of this convention. The secretariat of the UNCBD is located in Montreal, which is a city in the country of Canada, and it operates under the United Nations Environment Program. And the governing body is the Conference of Parties. Now, this Conference of Parties, we have these 196 parties that have ratified the convention. These parties, they come together in regular intervals of time. So, in every 2 years, okay, so every 2 years, these parties, they come together, okay, in a conference. They join a conference, and that conference is known as Conference of Parties, or COP. Okay. So it meets every 2 years to review the progress, as well as to set the priorities or to set the agenda for the convention. Okay. So the most recent conference of party, that is conference of party number 16, was held in the year 2024 in the city of Cali. Okay. Prior to that, we had COP 15 that was held in the year 2022. That was partly held in Kunming and Montreal, the city of Kunming that is in China, and Montreal that is in the city of, that's a city in Canada. Then a very example of the COP 11, it was held in the year 2012, and this is important because this was held in India in the city of Hyderabad. So this becomes important. Now, talking about the objectives of the CBD, that is Convention on Biological Diversity. So it has three core objectives, three main objectives, that is conservation, sustainable use, and fair and equitable benefit sharing. Okay, conservation of what, sustainable use of what, and what is this fair and equitable benefit sharing? The conservation of biological diversity at all levels. So we have to conserve the biodiversity or the biological diversity at all levels. And by all levels, we means at the species level, at the ecosystem level, and even at the genetic resources level. Okay, so we have to protect the species, we have to conserve the species, as well as we have to conserve the genetic makeup or the genetic resources that we are getting from that species. Talking about the sustainable use, we have the sustainable use of the components of biodiversity. So the components of the biodiversity, or the products or the parts that we get from the biodiversity, we have to make sure that they are available for the present as well as for the future generations. We have to make use of the components of the biodiversity such a way that the biodiversity or these components, they remain available for the future generations as well. And then there is fair and equitable benefit sharing, the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising out of the utilization of genetic resources. So first we have to conserve the genetic resources, then we have to make sure that the genetic resources that we are using them sustainably, and after the sustainable use, we have to also make sure that the benefits that the mankind is getting from the sustainable use of the genetic resources, that benefit should be shared fairly and equitably. Okay. So firstly conserve, then sustainably use, and then make sure that the benefits that we are getting from the use, that are shared in a fair manner and in an equitable manner in all the among all the stakeholders. Okay. Now we have two specialized protocols or two specialized instruments for targeted action. Okay. So we had the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety and the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing. Okay. So this conference of parties was held in the year 2000, and it was held in the city of Cartagena in the country of Colombia. Okay. And from that conference of parties, okay, came the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, and its focus is on addressing the potential risk posed by the living modified organism. So, living modified organisms are those organisms whose genetic makeup has been modified by using modern technologies. Then we have the Nagoya Protocol. This conference of parties was held in 2010 in city of Nagoya in Japan, and from that came the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing. And its focus is on operationalizing the CBD's third objective. And what was the CBD's third objective? That is fair and equitable benefit sharing. So, fair and equitable benefit sharing of the genetic resources. Now, let's discuss these protocols in bit more detail. First, the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. Okay, so its objective is to ensure the safe handling, transport, and use of living modified organisms. The living modified organisms, such organisms that result from the modern biotechnology that may have adverse effect on biodiversity. So the main objective is to prevent or the adverse effect on biodiversity from these living modified organisms that we make by using the modern biotechnology. So key mechanisms under the Cartagena protocol are the precautionary principle. So please note that these terms, they become important. This precautionary principle, the advance information agreement, and the biosafety clearinghouse. These three mechanisms, they become important because a direct question can be asked in the prelims examination that the precautionary principle or the advance information agreement, they are related to which of the protocols or which of the conventions of the United Nations. So the precautionary principles, the products from new technologies must be assessed with caution, allowing nations to balance the public health and against the economic benefits. Then is the most important mechanism, that is advance information agreement. Now this is a procedure which ensures the countries receive necessary information to make informed decision before agreeing to import the living modified organisms or the LMOs. Then we have the Biosafety Clearinghouse, which is a platform to facilitate the exchange of scientific, technical, and legal information on the living modified organisms. Okay. So if we have to discuss, we have a living modified organism. Okay. If we have to export this living modified organism, or if this living modified organism has to be transferred from one to country two, between two countries. Okay. So the country that is importing, okay, the country that is importing the living modified organism, it must go through the advance information agreement. Okay. So if this is the country A and it is importing any of the living modified organism, okay, then this country X should be given the advance information agreement. An agreement has to be signed in which all the details about the living modified organism, okay, the potential hazards, the potential benefits, everything has to be written, and it has to be given to the country that is importing the living modified organism. Then this goes to the biosafety clearing house. Okay, and this biosafety clearing house then approves the import or it denies the import. Okay, so based on the information exchange platforms, which is the biosafety clearing house, it either approves for import or it rejects the import. Okay, that is how this Cartagena protocol on biosafety works. Now, in supplement to the Cartagena protocol, we had the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur supplementary protocol that provides the international rules on liability and redress the damage to the biodiversity from the living modified organisms. So, the thing that you have to take from this sentence is that this Nagoya Kuala Lumpur supplementary protocol is also related to biosafety related to the living modified organisms. Okay. Now, discussing the second important protocol under the UNCBD, that is the Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing. Okay. Now, its objective is to provide a transparent legal framework for the fair and equitable sharing of benefits. And the fair and equitable sharing of benefits is the third objective of the UNCBD itself. Okay. So, it covers the genetic resources that are covered by the CBD and the traditional knowledge. Okay, so this is an extremely important point. Okay, it covers the genetic resources as well as the traditional knowledge that is associated with these genetic resources. A lot of aspirants, they tend to skip this point regarding the traditional knowledge. Okay, and how it works. So it has certain mechanism or certain methods, that is access obligations. We have to benefit. We have the benefit sharing obligation, the compliance obligations, and access and benefit sharing clearing house. So what happens is, so suppose this is a user, this is a corporation or any organization that tends to use, okay, certain genetic resources or certain traditional knowledge. First, they give a request. They ask for request. They access a request to the provider country and community. Okay. So a country from which the genetic resource has to be taken, okay, or a community from which whose traditional knowledge has to be used. The user asks for the access, requests for the access. The provider country or community, they establish the mutually agreed terms. Okay, so they enter into terms, they enter into a legal agreement, and they discuss the mutually agreed terms, and then they sign the legal agreement, the provider country or community and the user entity. Then, based on this legal agreement, the user utilizes the genetic resource. Okay, it utilizes the genetic resource, but it also has to pay. It has to also share the benefits. Okay, it has to fairly and equitably share the benefits, okay, of this knowledge or of the genetic resource can be both monetary as well as the non-monetary. So benefits can be monetary as well as non-monetary. Now, talking about the recent global blueprint of the UNCBD, we have the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, or the GBF. So the Kunming Montreal GBF, this was adopted in the COP15 2022, 4 years prior, and it has 4 goals and 23 targets for the year 2030. And the target was to halt and reverse the nature law. So we had the 4 overarching goals. Okay, this was adopted in COP15 in 2022. There are 23 action-oriented targets, and the vision is for 2050. Okay, so mainly the biodiversity should be halted by 2030, and the broader goals should be achieved by 2050. So the world's most ambitious blueprint to halt the and reverse the biodiversity loss by 2030. So we have to halt and reverse the biodiversity loss by 2030. This was adopted in the COP15 in Montreal in December 2022. The purpose is to replace the strategic plan for biodiversity and its Aichi targets. Okay, so Aichi targets are also related to the UNCBD. Okay, these were targets, the set of targets that were supposed to be achieved by 2020, the year 2020. Okay, so this Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, or the GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework, it replaces the Aichi targets. And the broader vision is the collective commitment to achieve the world living in harmony with nature by 2050. So there are two timelines. One is 2030. Till 2030, we have to halt and reverse the biodiversity loss. Till 2050, what we have to achieve? Living systems. Okay. Second is the sustainable use. We have to ensure the biodiversity is sustainably used and managed, and the nature's contributions to people are valued, maintained, and enhanced. Third is the benefit sharing. Okay. So first is ecosystem and species, second is sustainable use, and then there is benefit sharing. Okay, we have to ensure the monetary as well as the non-monetary benefits from the genetic resources. Sequence information that we will discuss later on are these are and the associated traditional knowledge are shared fairly and equitably among all the entities. And finally, there is means of implementation. Okay, so we have to secure the adequate financial resources. Okay, because all these conventions, all these protocols, they require certain financial inputs. Okay, they require the financial resources for the capacity building and technology to fully implement this global biodiversity framework. Okay? And progressively closing the biodiversity finance gap of rupees 700 billion per year. So there are 23 action oriented targets for 2030, and there are 4 broader goals that has to be achieved by 2050. So some of the important targets are target 2, that is restoration. We have to ensure at least 30% of the degraded ecosystems are restored by the year 2030. Then there is target 3, that is 30 by 30 target. Effectively conserve and manage at least 30% of the terrestrial, inland water and coastal and marine areas. Then there is target on pollution, target on harmful subsidies, as well as for the financial mobilization. We have to mobilize at least $200 billion per year from all sources. And this includes increasing the financial flows to the developing countries to at least 30 billion per year. And this all these 23 action oriented targets has to be achieved by the year 2030. Now talking about the digital sequence information. The term. What is this digital sequence information? Okay, so it is a part of the global biodiversity framework. It's what it was a part of the discussions. Okay, so the DSI, or the digital sequence information, it refers to the digital data derived from the genetic resources, such as the genomic and sequence data of plants, animals, and microorganisms. Okay, so the genomic sequence data. Okay, because all the living organisms, they are made up of the genetic content. They have their genetic content, and okay, sequencing their genetic content, okay, and the getting the data from that, that is the digital sequence information. And this information that we get from sequencing the genome of various organisms, this plays a fundamental role in modern environmental and biological research. and this includes the pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, and animal and plant breeding. But the biggest challenge is we have to ensure that the benefits arising from the commercial use of these genetic resources or the genetic information is publicly available digital information and are shared fairly and equitably. Okay, the two main objectives of the UNCBD. Okay, so for example, we have a medicinal flower. For example, we have a medicinal flower. We had the genetic resource. We have to. This is our genetic resource. This flower is our genetic resource. We sequence. We run a genetic sequence or a genomic sequence of it, and we get a complete sequence of its genome. Then from that genome, we can have the commercial applications in the pharmaceutical industry or in the some cosmetic industry. Okay, but what we have to ensure is that whether the benefits that are being derived from this genetic resource or from sequencing this genetic resource, whether these benefits are being shared fairly and equitably. Okay? And this issue is central to achieving the goal C of the global biodiversity framework, and it was a key focus in the recent negotiations as well. So what was the goal C of the GPF? The goal C was the benefit sharing. Okay, so this in COP15, we signed the GBF, that is Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. In the next conference of parties, that is in the COP16, in the year 2024, okay, we signed, that was held in the Cali, okay, in the city of Cali, in Colombia. Okay, so its primary focus, it was the first COP that dedicated to the implementation of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Okay, so framework was established in the COP15. In the COP16, the focus was on the implementation side. Okay, so the key achievements of the most recent, please note that this is important because before your exam, this is the latest conference of parties. So its outcomes and its achievements are important from the prelims examination point of view. So it operationalized a new financial mechanism for the DSI benefit sharing, okay, the digital sequence information sharing, and it adopted the global action plan on biodiversity and health, that is the One Health approach. So two things: the financial mechanism for DSI benefit sharing as well as the One Health approach. Then it strengthened the role of indigenous people and the local communities in the global biodiversity governance. And finally, the formal recognition of the need to integrate biodiversity and the climate policies. Okay, so climate policies cannot be without the consideration of biodiversity, and the policies regarding the biodiversity cannot overlook the climate policies. So all the climate change as well as the biodiversity, these two are interlinked. And most importantly, it established a new fund, a new financial mechanism that is known as the Cali Fund. Okay, so it is a new mechanism for the benefit sharing. Okay, remember we discussed that it operationalized a new financial mechanism for the DSI benefit sharing. So this new mechanism is the Cali Fund. Okay, so its purpose is that it's a new fund established to ensure the fair and equitable sharing of benefits from the digital sequence information of on the genetic resources. Now, the funding model is that industries benefit commercially from the DSI. Okay, for example, the pharmaceutical company, the biotechnology company should contribute a percentage of their profits or the revenues. And talking about the broader context, this complements the other financial mechanisms like the Kunming Biodiversity Fund and the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund to help meet the $200 billion per year mobilization target. That was one of the target among the 23 targets that has to be achieved by the year 2030. Yeah. So Cali Fund is a new fund to ensure the monetary benefits from the commercial use of DSI are shared fairly and equitably. So suppose we have the industry revenue from the DSI, be it a pharma company, the agriculture company, or from the biotech. They contribute. Okay, they contribute to this Cali Fund. Okay, the companies that are getting the benefits of the genetic sequence information, the digital sequence information, as well as from the genetic resources, they deposit certain part of their revenue, part of their profit as contribution in the Cali Fund. And out of all the corpus of the Cali Fund, at least 50% of the corpus of the Cali Fund has to be shared to has to be spent for the benefit sharing with the indigenous people and the local communities, and there should also be a focus on women and youth. Okay, so at least extremely important. So now we have talked about the UNCBD. Okay, and now let's discuss about the framework in our own country. Okay, so we have something called the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans. Okay, that is NBSAP, which are the principal instruments for implementing the convention at the national level. So India is has both signed as well as ratified the UNCBD. Okay, so in continuance of that, or in order to implement, okay, the convention at the national level, the entire country level, we have come out with the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans. We have come out with certain action plans. Okay. So the CBD requires all parties to develop the national strategy. Okay, so this we have done. Countries must integrate this process or this strategy into the broader national planning, and following the GBF adoption, okay, the Global Biodiversity Framework adoption, countries must update their NBSAPs to align with the new global goals and targets. Okay, and as of COP16, 119 out of 196 parties have submitted their national biodiversity targets. Okay, so we have the Global Biodiversity Framework under which we made the international commitment. The national government is obliged to come up with the national biodiversity strategy and action plan. So talking about the action plan of India, okay, so we have the national biodiversity strategy, the updated national biodiversity strategy. Okay, so India has launched the updated national biodiversity strategy aligned with the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, outlining the 23 national biodiversity targets. So there were 23 targets in the GBF. So we have the 23 national biodiversity targets. Okay, so the selected national targets are aiming for 30% of areas to be effectively conserved, targeting 50% reduction in the introduction of the new invasive alien species. Now, the invasive alien species, one of the factors, okay, is a part of the evil quartet that declines or that reduces the biodiversity. Then we have committed to halving the global food waste and reduce the global footprint on consumption. And we also have targeted to reduce the pesticide risk by half. Okay. So talking about the implementation structure of the National Biodiversity Strategy, we had the nodal ministry, that is the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Under that, we have the National Biodiversity Authority that was established by the Government of India under the the Biological Diversity Act of 2002. Under the National Biodiversity Authority, we had the state biodiversity boards, and under those, we have the biodiversity management committees, that is BMCs, at the local level, that is at the municipalities level. Now, all these UN conventions, that is the international environment conventions, they are important from the prelims point of view. Okay, and talking about the UNCBD, question was recently asked in the prelims examination of 2023. That is, in India, the biodiversity management committees are key to the realization of objectives of the Nagoya Protocol. Okay, so just now we have discussed the biodiversity management committees. Okay, so they are established under the implementation frame structure, that are they work at the lower level, okay, at the grassroots level. Okay, and they are key to the realization of the objectives of the Nagoya Protocol. So Nagoya Protocol is linked to the UN CBD. Okay, so this statement is correct. Okay, generally speaking, broadly, the statement is correct. The biodiversity management committees have important functions in determining access and benefit sharing, including the power to levy collection fees on the excess of the biological resources within its jurisdiction. So access and benefit sharing also part of the Nagoya Protocol. Okay, so this is one step ahead. So this statement is also correct. Okay, so this entire question was on the biodiversity management committees. Okay, and these biodiversity management committees, they help in the implementation of the UN CBD. So both the statements